I love your post. Like I usually
So I take it there's not really too many, there's not too many support for New Hampshire
the biggest thing that I get,
or is it a lack of awareness? Really, why we're here, right?
they don't really do much of it when you walk down the stairs. There's that going back in front of us watching. And I go, I said, obviously they don't endorse people to anybody downstairs. But thanks for the sharing the post.
Isn't this the legislature that's already aware of it?
Most of the folks here, yeah.
You know, it's kind of like,
Preaching to the choir.
right.
Someone's going to say, I agree with that.
Depends on how
You copy that?
you can always learn a little more, information to share.
Yeah, you copy from me?
Right, I understand. How do we reach the lefties?
Food.
I got it from a
No, that's an issue that you can talk about. Really is.
Oh, in conjunction with this,
Well, because it
amazing
leads
that,
into
you know, how many
the
millions
local plant, right,
because they're all about food sustainability and all that stuff. So that's one of those control mechanisms that RPCs are looking to get control. So they're taking the RPCs and the
All righty, I think we're going to get started if we can.
and think it's
We're a little bit late. We always like to try to make our presentations on time because we know everybody's busy and they have their own thing to be doing right now. My name is Jane Cormier, and this is just basically a little presentation. It's going to be a very short but fact-filled presentation for you. As legislators, I think we all have to get on the ball for understanding exactly what is in play for our regional planning commissions. And I think that, unfortunately, in trying to communicate to a lot of reps about today's meeting, I was really shocked to know the percentage of people that didn't even know what an RPC was, how it worked. So our job, as voted by our constituents, is to help inform our communities as to what's going on. And if we don't have the facts to do it, we can't do our job. It's our job to get this information out. So we have a little flyer here that gives you a basic organizational chart for what Ken is going to speak about. On the back is a lot of resource material. Just in a quick little, let you know what's coming up. I did put in a bill to repeal the RPCs. The bill has a sunset clause for any funding that has been in the system through the end of 2015. The bill also allows municipalities to once again take control of their communities and to still be able to work together. We're just deleting the reference to the Regional Planning Commission. The world won't fall apart. Communities won't fall into the dust. And we will have much better control at the local level once more, which is really what we should be about. So we're going to have a fight on our hands. We have 8 months. I have 8 months to get on the warpath and get out to communities. I've been all over the state, as far as Jefferson, Allsted, everywhere, talking to any group that's willing to listen. People are starting to become informed, and make no mistake, the social media that's in play with this campaign is pretty good. It's pretty new. And our goal is in the next 8 months before the next election to make sure that our people in our communities understand what RPCs are all about. And let's see what happens the next round of elections with an informed public that's about to lose their private property rights. So this is Ken Eyring. Ken has been the soldier getting this information out to our citizens in the state of New Hampshire for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to take any more time because he's great at this. And we'll take some questions at the end. I can speak specifically to what Alton has gone through and how we've combated this in Alton successfully. But there we go. Let's get started.
Okay. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you very much for coming. A year and a half ago, I knew nothing about what I'm going to talk about today. Between that time and now, I can honestly say, between a friend and I down in Windham, we've easily spent 1,500 hours doing this research. And it's not that I don't have a life, it's not that I don't have a family, I do. And I have a job too, but all of those have suffered because I felt so compelled with what I've found, and I believe I can honestly say what I'm about to share with you today is the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg. Because I know we're short on time, I'm just going to jump into this real quick. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but if anybody has any questions, if I could ask you to hold it until the end, it'll make it easier for me to get through everything. I've got 42 pages here. I'm going to try to do each one in less than a minute so that we can end on time. Basically, what got me started is in Windham, we had our Regional Planning Commission come in and do a presentation and say that they wanted our selectmen to sign an agreement for the Granite State future. They gave them a 12-page document. That 12-page document, this is the cover page. It says it's a partnership agreement of the Granite State future. Now on this document, on the very front page, there's a section here. Can you guys hear me when I'm turning this way? Can you still hear me over here? Okay, I speak very low, so please let me know if I need to speak up. So you can see on the bottom here, it mentions HUD requirements. It says, whereas the Regional Planning Commission is the lead point of contact with HUD on behalf of the program and will assume administrative responsibility to ensure the program is carried out in compliance with HUD requirements. That's the only point that it mentions HUD. It doesn't mention that this is a $100 million federal program called the Sustainable Communities Initiative. The Granite State Future is an umbrella program to administer that program here in the Granite State. We have 9 regional planning commissions. They joined together to form a consortium. They had to do that. They had to do that because this grant program requires at least $500,000 participation, and it requires, but it also stipulates that the grant money will not go to the state and it will not go to local towns. It goes to regional planning commissions or councils of government, which act for metropolitan planning organizations. So it's regional governance. Okay, those are all appointed people. They're not elected people. That's very important from my perspective. So I'm going to go on to. When we discovered this document, we raised some questions in that first meeting in Windham. We raised enough questions where our selectmen said, we're going to put off a decision for a few weeks, we want to look into this. During that time, my friend and I went to the National Regional Planning Commission. They are the lead point of contact with HUD. They signed the grant agreement. I went there, I asked them if I could get copies of the agreement, the application, and the grant that was approved and signed with HUD, and all associated documents. They gave me a 3-page document. I said, this is it? This is the cover page of that document. I said, this is all that there was? She said, yes. I said, would you mind if I look at this before I leave? She said, yes. And you'll see here that there's a section down here. It says, this instrument, which is a HUD 1044, sets forth a legally binding agreement between the parties as to all amounts, deliverables, tasks, period of performance, terms and conditions, all the legalese. Down below it says, this grant instrument consists of the following, some of which are incorporated by reference. There's 8 other lines that reference documents. Some of those lines reference multiple documents. Some of those documents have appendices. There's thousands of pages of documentation that our selectmen were not given before they were asked to make a decision on this program. After we learned about this program, my friend and I traveled to multiple towns across New Hampshire. We spoke with selectmen and planning board members, and to my knowledge, none of them signed on to this agreement. In fact, we were so successful that the Granite State Future people wrote up this document called Frequently Asked Questions. Right? If you get this, I ask that you read it very, very carefully, because I'm going to refer, just in the interest of time, I'm going to refer to one page in here to show you how they present their statements. So, as part of that HUD 1044, you can see here that it says that HUD will have substantial involvement. Now, it took to the 3rd meeting in Windham, because the 2nd meeting, we raised yet another long list of questions and concerns. And each time we asked our regional planning commissioner, the representative, what about HUD? HUD has mandates. This is a top-down program. Oh no. We were assured this was a grassroots, bottom-up program that the towns can do as little or as much as they want. and it's just a planning document. We're only producing a planning document. HUD has nothing to do with this. It wasn't until the third time that we were told, well, of course HUD is giving us money, they're gonna want to get something for that money. And those are all on video, so if anybody questions that or would like to see that, I'd be happy to send them a link. But you can see here in the substantial involvement section, it says, HUD's Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities will work in partnership with its grantees to advance the program objectives of the grant program. The cooperative agreement allows for substantial involvement of HUD staff to enhance the performance of the grantee and the completion of the deliverables. There's several things that I highlighted because these are key and important. Under the studies and reports section, it says that HUD will review and provide recommendations on the final report study, including final interpretation of study results. This is key, because any set of data that you look at can be interpreted from any particular perspective. And if you want to spin the data, you can make it say pretty much whatever you want. Now, this program is a mapping program. Part of it, there's many different aspects of it, of which I'll touch upon. But part of it is to collect data about virtually every property in every town across America. We want to know about our resources, our water, culverts, wetlands. They want to know about demographics. All of that data is going into local databases, which will be transferred to state databases, which will be transferred to a federal database. Another section in here says that under approvals and reviews, that HUD has the authority to review and approve key personnel. Well, that's not a grassroots bottom-up program. It also says in the participation and monitoring that they will be involved with implementing HUD requirements which limit recipient discretion. Definitely not bottom-up, grassroots, volunteer advisory only. Where appropriate, substantial direct HUD operational involvement or participation. So this is the contract, this is the grant that was given to them. Okay, so now this page here comes from the Granite State Future Agreement. I have this just because I want to read off some of the things that the regional planning commissioners are trying to plan for. It says that they have long-range planning efforts for transportation, land use, economic development, housing environment, energy, cultural and historical resources, public health, environmental planning, water infrastructure, natural resources, and climate change. Okay? The Regional Planning Commission started out as being a conduit for towns to talk to each other, to plan about their roads and the types of things that maybe they need to share resources across borders. This has turned into a micromanagement of our entire lives. Now, what's really key is that these people are making decisions outside of your domain, outside of your discretion. Okay, so this is another page from the Granite State Future Program. Up at the top here, I've listed for my reference each document and which page it came from. In case anybody asks me, I can then provide that to you. Now in here it says that the 9 regional planning commissions will develop regional plans for each of the 9 regions that consist of the following elements. It talks about comprehensive needs assessment, vision statements. This term, housing plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing, comes up all over the place. The first couple times I read it, I just took it as 3 words. I didn't realize that there was something important and specific, that was a specific term that had a definition behind it. Down here it talks about scenario planning, including metrics and performance monitoring to track the plan implementation. Well, the metrics, there are mandatory outcomes. One of those mandatory outcomes is reducing vehicle miles traveled in your region. And they want you to track that and provide metrics as to how you're going to track that. Now, some of the things I'm telling you I know sound bizarre and far-fetched, but I ask you to have an open mind. I know when I first saw this, I thought, this is America. This can't possibly happen here. And it's because of that, as a country, that we have that mentality, that it is happening here. So in this document, they have a bunch of different partners and teams and subcommittees and committees. And one of those committees is a regional equity team that is comprised of representatives of underserved and marginalized populations in the region that will ensure the voices of these populations are reflected in the regional plan. So I asked our Regional Planning Commission representative, well, who are the underserved and marginalized populations? And his comment was, well, Windham is a bedroom community, a lot of people travel, they don't have time to get involved with your local government and your state government, and we want to reach out to those people to make sure everybody has a voice. So, I was surprised to see, and I must apologize, I don't have this one page, I was surprised to see that there's actually a definition for underserved populations. And it's not people who live in a bedroom community. It's people who are Hispanic or African American. I'm not racist, I'm just telling you what the documentation says. It's people who are unemployed or who have disabilities. Now, I believe everybody should be represented when we do planning, but I don't believe there should be a given weight to one group of people or another. And when I asked this question, I was given a false answer, and that led me to some concern. So, also in the Granite State Future document, that 12-page document I referenced, there's a section here called decision-making process. Down here it says, any disputes regarding administration or grant resources are resolved by the executive committee. So the executive committee has final decision-making authority in this program. Okay, so I'm going to take about 5 minutes and put together a little chart for you. This chart was built by taking excerpts from the legally binding agreements, and each of these excerpts right here were used to build this up. So right now, this was from the Granite State Future Agreement, page 1. It says, whereas a partnership has been created comprised of the state's 9 regional planning commissions, cities, towns, and county, state agencies, and quasi-governmental organizations, and nonprofit organizations to work cooperatively in the development of 9 coordinated regional plans and 1 integrated statewide development policy framework. So we're going to build a statewide policy framework, and we're going to have 9 regional planning commissions working together. Each one's going to create their own regional plan, and they are then going to be incorporated into a statewide policy framework. Now, one of the mandatory outcomes of the Sustainable Communities Program requires aligned federal planning and investment resources that mirror the local and regional strategies for achieving sustainable communities. That's in the NOFA, Notice of Financing Availability. That's on page 60. So the plans that are created must align with the federal plans. This is a nationwide program. So the federal planning is not going to be altered to match our state planning at the local level. So this next one says the cooperative agreement allows for substantial involvement of HUD staff to enhance the performance of the grant team to completion of their deliverables. So now I've got the federal core partners, which are HUD, the EPA, and the DOT. This is a joint federal program managed by those 3 agencies. They have direct input because of this program. They have a direct conduit into statewide policy planning. The next quote says, each of the regional planning commissions will integrate its regional plan for sustainable development, which is RPCs, into other federal and state funded initiatives, as well as integrate the work of these other programs into the RSP. So there's a cross-integration process going on here. The federal agency partners, so there's already programs that are going, they are associated with this program. HUD, the EPA, the DOT have a direct conduit into it, and the state agency as well has a direct conduit right into this statewide policy framework planning. This next quote, I won't read it to you, it's basically the same as the previous one, but it mentions organizations, and that brings in the pay-to-play partners. There are special interest groups that have paid to become a part of this program. The provisions that bypass our local and state elected representatives and empower direct input from federal agencies, special interest groups, and the RPCs are violations of our constitutions. Article 2, Article 7, and Article 8. Now, the structure of the Granite State Future Program was designed in a secret meeting. The meeting was called the TOU Roundtable, and this quote here says, "The statewide policy committee, comprised of numerous state agency and nonprofit representatives as listed in section C below, will incorporate the work of the Transportation Land Use Roundtable and recommend a consistent statewide policy framework to the executive committee." So the statewide policy committee now is going to align all of the plans. So all the regions have their own plans. Now we have another committee, another level up away from elected representation, that's going to pull them all together, make sure everything's aligned, and push down changes down below. Then we have the executive committee. The executive committee, comprised of 9 RPC executive directors, will serve as the overall decision-making body to allocate resources, set goals, guide program alignment between regions, a few other things, and also resolve differences. So now we've got the 9 regional planning commissions are working independently, but their plans now have to be approved and consolidated into this through the statewide policy committee, and if there are still any things that don't align with the federal planning, that's where the executive committee comes in. And that gets percolated up to the statewide level and then back down. By signing the agreement, towns have committed to implement the plan before it is defined. The clause here says, whereas partner cities, towns, and counties within each region commit to participating in this cooperative effort by joining in the regional visioning process, advising in the development of regional policies, identifying strategies, and prioritizing implementation measures to achieve the goals identified in your regional plans. So here I've got your town selectmen and your councilmen and your town planners. They were involved with choosing representatives, which is this row here, to sit with the regional planning commissions on their committees. So this is one layer of unelected officials. The statewide policy committee is a second level, and the executive committee is a third level. So the organizational structure, as I said before, was designed by the Transportation Land Use Roundtable. And this is what we've come up with. You can see that there's no place for the executive council, the state senators, state representatives, selectmen, councilmen, or planners. All of the decision-making process is occurring outside of your jurisdiction, outside of your domain, and without your guidance, without your input and your leadership. I raised these concerns in Windham, and the town attorney said, in fact, a study of the scope of work document available at the NRPC website reflects an anticipated final implementation phase, which includes an expectation that state funding initiatives will align with the outcomes as called for in the adopted statewide plan. These consequences are not related to the agreement in principle, but most certainly could be consequences of the final outcome. So here is a list of some of the federal partner programs that are associated with the Granite State Future. So you've got HUD, FEMA, you have the U.S. Economic Development Administration, the EPA, you've got the USDA, Rural Community Development, Federal Highways, Climate Impact Assessments. You also have some other partners. These are pay-to-play partners. Some of them are agencies, state agencies, and some of them are just special interest groups. So you have the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation Conservation Law Firm. You also have DES, Department of Transportation. I'm going to come back to some of these in a little bit. Now, I mentioned to you that this was put together in secret, and it was. This document here was given to me by Carrie Deers. She's the person who signed the grant agreement with HUD on behalf of our entire state's regional planning commissions. She was part of this TOU roundtable, along with a bunch of other groups that were represented. And she gave me a couple of pages from that, saying that these were considered government documents. That there were no meeting minutes taken, because it was considered to be an ad hoc committee. and they didn't need to do that. So I'm just going to highlight a few things from these couple pages that I got from her. It says, our first conclusion was that there needs to be an overarching vision for the state of New Hampshire as a whole. And they went on to describe what their vision should be. They said, the thinking is that this vision needs to be embraced broadly and should guide many, many efforts in New Hampshire, climate change task force, conservation efforts, local community boards, every single player with an impact on the future of New Hampshire. Now, who's going to do this? Who's going to oversee this task? I would think it would be you, my elected representatives, the people that were voted into office with the trust to perform the people's business, but not in their minds. In their minds, they've decided to anoint themselves the keepers of the flame. The overarching goal of this keepers group should be to see that increasing portions of New Hampshire's
Is
housing.
this still part of that document? They
Yes.
use the words keepers of the flame?
This is the second page of what Carrie Deers gave me.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. So, the overarching goal of this keepers group should be to set the increasing portion of New Hampshire's housing, jobs, and service needs are being met by in central places. Now let's look at what they consider to be the central place. Now all of this markup is mine. But you can see here, they have included the keepers might be organized as follows. We have government entities. We have agencies, New Hampshire DES, the DOT, we have the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, the Local Government Center, the RPCs. I don't see you. I don't see the Senate. I don't see the Executive Council or the governor. Down here we have nonprofits. Over on the right we have private entities. And in the middle we have the keepers. Who are these keepers? And what is their mindset? Well, down here below, they said in order to come to the table as a keeper, an organization would have to have endorsed the vision as an operating principle of its individual organization's work. Failure to perform could possibly be subject to challenge by other members. In other words, you got to go along to get along and you're out. Now the really big vision.
Sounds like Cormier.
The really big vision. These keepers need to meet with other keepers on a regular basis to weave the silos together. Now I ask to remind you that you're not part of this. Now here's the email from Carrie Deers, which says, we do not have minutes from the TLU. We have provided the meeting notes and work products to you. The TLU is an ad hoc committee convened by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, which is not a public agency or public body. We have provided the information to you because they are considered governmental records that were received by our office. There is no history of what they have discussed in those meetings, which have defined the entire structure of the Granite State Future Program, of which you are not a part of. So who was in those meetings? Well, the Transportation Land Use Working Group. I've only highlighted a few people here because, again, we're short for time. Ben Frost from the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, Roger Hawk from Plan New Hampshire, Carrie Deers, Jeffrey Taylor from Jeffrey Taylor and Associates. I've highlighted them because I'm going to touch upon them in a little bit. Now, Alton, now they're going to tell you that the Granite State Future Program is advisory only, that when towns sign on to this agreement, they are not legally and financially liable for the agreement with HUD. That there are flow-down provisions with HUD, but they flow down to the regional planning commissions, but that HUD cannot hold any of your towns liable. And that's true. And the regional planning commissions are advisory only. That's true. But their partners are not. Okay? We we have state agencies, and we have federal agencies that are partners of this program that have agreed to cross-integrate their policies directly into our state policies and then back into their respective agencies, bypassing every one of you. And I say that with concern and with deep respect. So this grant agreement is a community planning grant, okay? This is important because this grants like this are being offered to our towns across the state. The planning grants are being administered through the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. This grant is for the town of Alton. This is for them to do a study as to whether or not they have enough workforce housing. It was a $30,000 grant with a plus $7,500 matching funds to bring the total up to $37,500. It says, whereas pursuant to a competitive application process, NHHFA desires to provide a grant to the municipality for a project to develop new or revised land use regulations. Now, they just voted down workforce housing last year. But now, because of this grant, they now have a mandate where they are going to have to put that back onto their ballot, because that's what this grant is all about.
Where does it say that they have to put it on the ballot?
I'm going to get to that, sir.
Paragraph 7.
So it says in the project performance, it says the municipality agrees to perform work to complete the project pursuant to the terms and conditions of the scope of work attached as Exhibit A. Now I'm only taking the pages from this agreement to skip through and make it quick, but I have all of these agreements intact if you want me to email them to you. So here's the scope of work Exhibit A, and it says that this information will then be used as part of an outreach and education effort focused on workforce housing and will result in the drafting of new regulatory language to be presented for ballot vote in 2014. It's part of the project deliverables, new regulatory language to present to the voters for ballot vote in 2014. Now here's the money and how it's going to be spent. Now, when Jeffrey Taylor and Associates was in Alton a few weeks ago to explain what it was they were doing and whether or not Alton needed additional workforce housing or not, I can honestly say it seemed about like half the questions that their representative was asked, he didn't have the answer to. He literally said, I don't know. Does Alton need more workforce housing? Well, you're under compliance right now, but you should have more. How much? I don't know. So they're spending $8,000 for public outreach and education, and they're getting $15,000 to prepare draft regulatory language. Now, it's my assumption that's to write the warrant article. Now, all the warrant articles I've ever seen are pretty darn short. Now, as part of this, because Alton signed on with with the NHHFA, okay? They are now a sub-grantee. They are now tied to HUD. This is the agreement that the NHHFA signed with HUD for this community planning grant. Okay? It has its own set of legally binding agreements, and it refers to the terms and conditions and the notice of funding availability, and those are the two same documents that are tied with the Granite State Future Program. So you can see here that they got $1 million, and they've got some match and leverage amount of another $937,000. So the whole program is going to be close to $2 million. Now, there's a couple partners in here, the New Hampshire Legal Assistance, I'm going to touch on them in a second, and Plan New Hampshire, I believe that's Roger Hawk.
New Hampshire Municipal Association's there.
Yeah. So in this grant agreement, there are several references to the Fair Housing and Civil Rights Law. That was one of them, and here's another. I'm going to come back to that later. I just wanted to point that out because by signing this agreement, they are now bound to further the Federal Fair Housing Act. So in Exhibit C, here's the flow down provision, so there is no question that Alton has now assumed responsibility to conform to all of the terms and conditions of the grant that was awarded to the NHHFA. It says that if grantee contracts or subawards funds under this agreement with a person or entity to perform the work under this award, the grantee shall include in the contract or subaward agreement such provisions as may be necessary to ensure that all contractors and sub-grantees comply with the requirements of the grant. Down below, it states specifically the terms and conditions of this agreement flow down to all tiers of sub-grantees. It also has in it the same section that was in the Granite State Future Substantial Agreement, Substantial Involvement section, and it talks to review and provide recommendations of the final report study, including interpretation of final results. Now, the person from Jeffrey Taylor and Associates, he could not interpret how many workforce housing units Alton needed in order to protect themselves from future possible litigation. That, though, that determination is reserved for HUD, because HUD has the final report study, including final interpretation. So this grant went around, collected all the data about workforce housing in Alton, which then gets turned over to HUD.
The interpretation of whatever you put into for the zoning change, but the law in New Hampshire is specific on workforce housing.
I understand that, but I'm going to show you something else a little bit later.
Okay.
And I'm not to question or to say that you're wrong. What I just said was with due respect.
You're not always right.
I've been told that.
Okay. Now, one of the partners is Action Media. Now, Action Media will serve as contractor to develop a communication strategy and to train RPC staff in effective outreach techniques. They're going to do things like issue framing, final communication strategy, develop communications, and identify appropriate media forums, and develop content. I had something here before my computer crashed. I have some notes here. I'm sorry, I have to find this because I want to read this to you. I had the Action Media website queued up in my browser. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I have it here. This is the Action Media website. This is one of the pay-to-play partners. Now, if you go to the Get Results page, it says Action Media provides communications for positive social change. It goes on to say our client's work is about power. How are resources used? Who gets to decide? Our work is about the power of communications to shift the advantage, to mobilize support, and neutralize opposition.
Lewinsky approves.
I'm the opposition. You're taking my tax dollars to quiet my voice and my concerns being presented to you, my elected representatives.
And they're located on that one, right?
No, they are not. They're in a different state. I forgot what state they're in.
Minnesota.
Minnesota, thank you.
Michael Goldberg and Dick Brooks started them.
No, it was founded by Saul Alinsky.
So why do they feel that they need a media consultant to spin the message? Because here in the application, there was a narrative section where they had to fill up to 25 pages to describe what it was they wanted to achieve. And in there, they have a section, strategy to address barriers and incorporate existing plans. And I quote, the anticipated barriers include New Hampshire's strong tradition of individual property rights and resultant resistance to planning and zoning. Our property rights are a barrier to them implementing this plan.
Ken, can I just interject quickly? In your booklet, the second to last page has that full quote. That is probably the most powerful piece of verbiage that we have against this, and we should all talk about it frequently. It's on the real facts, second to last page in the book, the entire strategy that is listed on the HUD grant. Very strong stuff for us.
Now, what's equally disturbing is that in the same section, it says, during the planning process, the Regional Advisory Committee will identify any additional common barriers and strategies and bring these to the Sustainability Policy Committee. The Policy Committee, whose members include decision makers from the DOT, DES, and OEP, our state agencies, will work together to identify potential statewide strategies for reducing and/or eliminating the barriers. These strategies will then also be incorporated into the final statewide sustainable development policy framework. So they're going to find solutions to reduce and/or eliminate our strong tradition of individual property rights and incorporate those solutions into their respective agencies. So I talked briefly about this document. This document was written by the Granite State Futures people in October of 2012. It's their frequently asked questions document. In here, there's a section that says, what possible outcomes will the plans evaluate? And in that section, it says, below is a list of the types of outcomes that will be evaluated. Okay? Evaluated. And there's 8 things listed here. Among that is align federal planning and investment resources that mirror the local and regional strategies for achieving sustainable communities, reduce social and economic disparities for low-income minority communities and other disadvantaged populations within the region, decrease per capita VMT and transportation-related emissions for the region. There are others in there. Now, this document claims they're going to be evaluated, but the legally binding notice of funding availability on page 60 says that those are mandatory outcomes. They copied it word for word.
What document is that?
This is from the notice of funding availability, page 60.
So that's with HUD and New Hampshire Housing Finance?
This is with New Hampshire Housing Finance and with the Granite State Future and the Regional Planning Commissions, because the notice of funding availability is part of both of those grants. Okay, so now I've got 2 other partners I want to talk about real quick. The New Hampshire DES, it says here that DES shall integrate the recent efforts into the RPSD, the Regional Plan for Sustainable Development, including the Governor's Water Sustainability Commission, other recent legislative study commission findings and recommendations, New Hampshire Water Resources Primer, Climate Action Plan, Climate Change Adaptation Planning, and numerous river, lake, and watershed protection plans. NHDES will look to the RPSDs to inform its ongoing source water protection, water infrastructure planning and funding, and watershed protection planning, which are funded under a different grant by the US EPA. And all of these will be incorporated into the statewide planning, again, bypassing your oversight. Now, another partner is the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and it says that the NHHFA will work to integrate into the RPSD its recent consolidated plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And we kept reading that term, analysis of impediments, and then we came across the document, analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Now, this was written under the guidance of the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. And in it, I've pulled out a few excerpts. On page 1, it says, New Hampshire is a recipient of HUD funding and is therefore required to document that it is engaged in efforts to affirmatively further fair housing. U.S. versus Westchester County, a recent federal court case, makes it clear that these obligations should be taken very seriously and that local and state government officials can no longer gloss over the civil rights certifications they execute when accepting federal community and housing development funds. Westchester County, New York was successfully sued by the United States and a housing discrimination organization under the Federal False Claims Act, alleging that the county had falsely certified it was engaged in activities that affirmatively further fair housing. Now, we came across this prior to meeting with our selectmen for the first time a year and a half ago. And I called the county executive's office the day that we were going to meet with our selectmen, and I shared my concerns about the Sustainable Communities Initiative and what our town might about to sign on to. I asked the secretary, do you think that this will resonate with the county executive? And she said, oh yes, in fact, I'm confident he'll want to speak to you himself. He's got a very busy day, so I'm not sure if he'll be able to do that. But I will pass it on to him. 45 minutes later, I got a call from his chief of staff. We spoke for half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, about my concerns and what's going on in Westchester County. The lawsuit was brought on by a small nonprofit. There were 7 people, only of which one is full-time at the last time that we did our research. One was half-time and the others worked an hour a week. The settlement was, the lawsuit was brought because the paperwork wasn't filled out properly and a couple of sections didn't have the right boxes checked. The settlement, the previous county executive settled with HUD instead of risking triple damages. So they settled for $51.6 million to build 750 homes across Westchester County. I believe $7 million of that went to that nonprofit organization for bringing the lawsuit. So also in here, we have the biographies of the people who wrote the analysis of impediments. The NHHFA subcontracted that work to the New Hampshire Legal Assistance. So Christine Wellington, she's managing attorney of NHLA's Manchester office. Daniel Feltus, he's a staff attorney with NHLA in Concord. Christine Lavallee, she manages the NHLA's housing law program and coordinates its fair housing work. And Elliot Berry, he's the managing attorney of NHLA's national office. He's been a lead counsel on many groundbreaking appellate courses, including Britton versus Chester, a landmark affordable housing decision codified under RSA 67458, our workforce housing laws. These people were directly responsible for our current workforce housing laws. And now what they're doing is they're writing the document which defines what is discrimination, what is an impediment to fair housing. They have filed other successful lawsuits that, quote, violated the impediments to fair housing. So this might seem to be the fox guarding the hen house, because they're drawing the line as to what's acceptable and what's not, and then bringing legal action. So also part of the analysis of fair impediments, in there it says, in the preliminary decision, the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York held that a government entity that certifies to the federal government that it will affirmatively further fair action as a condition to its receipts of federal funds must consider the existence and impact of race discrimination on housing and opportunities and course and choice in its jurisdiction. This case will impact states and municipalities throughout the United States. As HUD Deputy Secretary Ron Sims declared, grantees are now, quote, on notice. Before they certify compliance for affirmatively furthering fair housing, recipients of federal funds should take care to conduct meaningful analysis of impediments. So this is an op-ed written by the county executive. He says that they are meeting their obligation to build the houses. They're ahead of schedule. He talks about HUD's approach is to unilaterally move the goalposts, that the settlement calls on the county to submit an AI, which is the analysis of impediments, that's acceptable to HUD. The purpose of the AI is to outline obstacles to fair housing choice. Prior to their settlement, HUD had never rejected an AI, but now they are up to 5 rejections. He went on to say that HUD is clearly using the AI to expand the terms of the settlement from a straightforward stipulation to build housing in an open-ended utopian integration order, which HUD then plans to use as the model across the country. He goes on to say that what is true is that Westchester County, according to the most recent 2010 census, is one of the most diverse places in the United States. Westchester is the 4th most diverse county in New York, behind Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, tied for Manhattan. And if Westchester were a state, it would be the 7th most diverse in terms of Hispanic population and 14th most diverse in terms of African American. The county executive goes on to say that there's a lot of homes that he would like to own, but he can't afford. That's not discrimination, that's economics. HUD has taken those demographic statistics and have declared de facto segregation. And the county executive went on to say that evidence of HUD's overreach includes the following unjustified demands: that the county dismantle local zoning laws. However, HUD knows full well the county does not possess, as HUD is a home rule state. The specific zoning practices which must be addressed include limitations on the size, type and number of developments in the community, lot size and density, and the number of bedrooms in a unit. In other words, all zoning. Communities will be given 90 days to enact changes, and the county is required to take action to counter community opposition. So, there was a story on Fox News, and I'm just going to take two quotes from the then Deputy Secretary Ron Sims. He said, "Today we've taken an important step toward building what we call geography of opportunity." He went on to say that at HUD we believe this approach to equitable development can serve as a model for building strong, inclusive, sustainable communities across the entire United States. Now I have one more thing to show you. And this is a state of the county address.
A quick history. The county was sued in 2006 under the False Claims Act of 1863. The charge was that the county accepted federal dollars from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but failed to study whether race is a factor in housing opportunities. In 2009, former county executive Andrew Spano and the Board of Legislators settled the case. And critically important, there was never a finding of fact of wrongdoing on the part of the county or an admission of guilt in the settlement. Instead of going to court, the county and the federal government both agreed to settle under the following terms. The county would spend at least $51 million to build 750 units of housing for lower-income people in 31 so-called eligible or mostly white communities by the end of 2016. Now, progress is measured by annual benchmarks and significant penalties for failing to meet them. So let's look at our progress. The county is well ahead of schedule. By the end of 2013, the county must have 300 units with financing in place. We surpassed that benchmark in March. Everyone in the county should be proud of that record, and I know I am. Not just because we are meeting our obligations, but because of the way we are doing it, by working cooperatively with our towns and villages. And I'm proud of how, through the decades, the communities have been building affordable housing not just to meet their own needs, but also the needs of the entire region. And we have more than 50 awards to show for it, even some from HUD. And for the record, I am proud that Westchester is the 4th most diverse county in all of New York State in terms of African Americans and Hispanics. We are tied with Manhattan. And Westchester's diversity is one of our greatest strengths. And as county executive, I will defend with every tool at my disposal the right of people to live in any neighborhood in Westchester, in any home they can afford. And let me say this very clear. There is absolutely no place for discrimination in our county. The biggest and really the only issue going forward is zoning. The federal government has a very different agenda and vision for Westchester. In fact, HUD calls us its, quote, grand experiment. That means Washington bureaucrats, who you will never see or meet, want the power to determine who will live where and how each neighborhood will look. Now, what's at stake is the fundamental right of our cities, towns, and villages to plan and zone for themselves. This home rule is guaranteed by the New York State Constitution. HUD thinks it can trample on Westchester because it has the misguided notion that zoning and discrimination are the same thing. They are not. Zoning restricts what can be built, not who lives there. Zoning exists to keep traffic from endangering kids on their way to school, to prevent factory noise and smoke from invading residential neighborhoods, and to stop raw sewage from polluting our drinking water. Zoning exists to protect quality of life for everyone. Take away the zoning that protects Westchester's reservoirs and watershed, and you put the drinking water of 8 million New York City residents at risk. Now listen carefully. because I know what I'm about to tell you sounds exaggerated and unbelievable, but it's not. And I urge you to go to westchestergov.com and read for yourself the letters I'm about to reference. In its letter of May 13th, 2011, HUD insists the county must go, quote, beyond the four corners of the settlement. In other words, they admitted that what they are demanding is not in the agreement, and their demands are outrageous. HUD wants no restrictions in any neighborhood on height, size, acreage, density, number of bedrooms, and lack of water or sewers. In fact, in a letter on March 13th this year, HUD goes so far as to even attack single-family, quarter-acre lots as, quote, restrictive zoning practices that, in their view, could be discriminatory. Really? You know, like many in this county, I live in a modest house on a quarter-acre piece of land, and my home is my biggest investment. And I thought working hard, paying your taxes, and one day paying off your mortgage was the American dream. Now think about what's at stake. The federal government is trying to force me, as county executive, to sue each municipality to abolish even basic zoning protections. Now, what does that mean for you if that happens? It means the neighborhood you live in today could change over time, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. A 5-story building or higher could be put on your street, not only by HUD, but by any developer. Because if you take away the zoning rules for HUD, you take away the rules for everyone. And that's not all. New demands by HUD just keep on coming, each one more overreaching than the last. In that same March 13th letter, HUD contends that the settlement's requirement to build 750 units of affordable housing was just a starting point. The county's target is really 10,768, based on an old 2004 Rutgers University study that was never even accepted by the county. Let me say that number again. 10,768 housing units. That's almost 15 times the settlement's requirement. And that study allocates a number to each community. Harrison, 756 units. That's more than the entire settlement. North Castle, 712 units. Bedford, 396 units. Scarsdale, 160 units. The list goes on and on until you reach 10,768. Now, put a dollar figure on 10,768 units, and the cost is between $700 million and $1 billion. Now, to come up with $1 billion, we would have to raise county property taxes 200%. 200%, at a time when the state tax cap is 2%. How's that going to work? And that's just county taxes. School and local taxes would certainly increase too, along with crowded classrooms and a strain on services. And here is what is so frustrating. We have tried to work with HUD. They ask for something, and our staff spends hours and hours to provide them with volumes and volumes of data. For HUD, zoning has become a civil rights concern, and they told us to review their list of 6 restrictive zoning practices. So we did. We studied and analyzed them across all 853 zoning districts throughout Westchester. Then we applied more than 30 additional criteria. In all, we looked at more than 26,000 data points. Conclusion: Westchester's zoning is not exclusionary based on race. The major impediment is economics. People live where they choose and where they can afford. HUD wasn't satisfied. Now they wanted a legal analysis. So we asked Professor John Nolan of the Pace University Land Use Law Center, a leading expert on affordable housing. So he conducted a separate legal analysis. And guess what? His conclusion supported ours. Each time we've asked the federal government to provide proof of exclusionary zoning, they come up with no answer. And they certainly have no answer for this. How could the zoning in the settlement's 31 eligible communities be exclusionary if the county is ahead of schedule building affordable housing in those communities? It's pretty obvious. The federal government will not be satisfied until we give them the answer that they want. no matter what the facts are. And now comes the insidious part. To intimidate the county into changing our conclusions on zoning. HUD has been withholding money that was promised to our local communities for the last 2 years. The amount is now up to $12 million. And this money not only goes towards affordable housing, it goes to communities that have nothing to do with the settlement, and some of Westchester's neediest residents for programs like homelessness prevention.
I'm going to stop it here because I know time is getting short. I want to point out just a couple things. That Westchester County is 70% Caucasian. New Hampshire is 95% Caucasian. Westchester County right now is the highest tax county in the country, before increasing by 200%. There's one more thing I want to point out. That in the documentation, this is the legally binding documentation, it says at the project's conclusion, the unified set of sustainability policies will be presented to the governor's office for endorsement by state government. It goes, in the detailed scope of work document, it says that the executive committee will seek endorsement of the plan by the New Hampshire Council on Resources and Development, predominantly comprised of New Hampshire Sustainable Communities Initiative state agency partners, which will help to ensure that state agencies institutionalize the plan and that sources of funding align with the plan. So the people who are writing the plan are on the committee, which will help to ensure that the state agencies institutionalize the plan. Again, with all due respect, I don't see where you're involved with this and where we have representative oversight. Yes, sir.
My pitchfork is available, and I will be joining with everyone else. The question is, in addition to your analysis of what the problem is, do you have some solutions at the federal level, at the state level, at the county level, and at the local level? Either legislative solutions, political solutions, Saul Alinsky solutions.
I gave Jane a RSA 204C is the RSA that governs housing.
Jack, I'm going beyond that. I'm asking whether, and I'm sorry, I came in late, I don't know your name.
My name is Ken Eyring, I'm from Lincoln, New Hampshire.
Ken, do you have a comprehensive plan to undermine this effort and stop it, rather than just, in addition to just making us aware of the problem?
Can I say a little bit?
I'd like to have the answer from him, if I may. Do you have a plan?
I would respect, yes, I do.
May we have copies?
I haven't written it up.
Please do, and please,
I will. Can I have a card and I will make sure I send it to you?
I will get you my email address. Thank you.
It's my concern that all this is occurring without your knowledge, or maybe you do, but as Representative Cormier said in the beginning, not many people were even aware that we had regional planning commissions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the first thing I would respectfully ask is that you put together an investigation as our state representatives and look deeply into this, because we need to really know what's going on. This is a group of people who are making policy for our state and then imposing that outside of the elected representative legislative process. I believe, and I and my friend and several other people who have spent many, many hours on this will gladly help and assist and provide links and references to documentation so that you can come to your own conclusions. I've tried very hard today to not interject my personal opinions, but just present you with the facts so that you can come to your own conclusions. To me, it's pretty clear. So that's where I would start, sir. I would also respectfully request that you look into severely modifying the role and the authority and the scope of what the regional planning commissions can do. Because right now, they believe they have the justification to interject what their ideal world is based upon every aspect of our lives. I read off 11 different things in the beginning. they also talk about education. You're gonna have out here in Concord, you're gonna lose one of your lanes. Think about, this is all part of this sustainable communities plan. I was surprised when that passed, because now you're gonna have less traffic, your businesses are gonna suffer out here. Their solutions to traffic issues is to reduce the size of the lanes and to remove lanes, to make it so difficult for traffic that it'll go away. It's not to add another lane. They call it traffic calming, they call them road diets. It's stunning. Again, I've really looked over thousands of pages of documents, and I could talk for days on this, and I could bring in my friend who's studied different aspects of this and the different players and the roles that they have been involved with. And it's quite startling that until you start to peel back the onion, you don't realize how in-depth this really is. So I think we need to look at our legislation, workforce housing. We have parts of workforce housing that are even more restrictive than the federal government's definition of workforce housing. We should restrict what the regional planning commissions should be doing. We need to have oversight with climate change legislation. Now, I know that that's a political issue, and I know that there are people on different sides of the fence. But we need to have oversight and have both sides represented, because we have our state agencies are implementing their policies that are pushing these agendas forward, and the regulations are killing us. They're killing our businesses, they're making it very expensive to do business here, and they're attacking our liberties and our freedoms. And our founding fathers were very clear, property and liberty are inseparable, and we're losing our property rights at a rapid pace. We've been losing them over time, but we're losing them even faster now.
In closing, I really do want to say something, because I think Rep. Kirk is talking, he wants a solution, and we all want a solution that are in here. This has been creeping in for decades. It's insidious. It's in everything. And there will not be a one-shot hit to fix this by any stretch of the imagination. Federal government, personally, I don't know what we do about the federal government. That's for, I guess, federal people to talk about. What I do know is New Hampshire, and I do know Alton, and I do my surrounding communities. We want an answer for this. We get to our communities, our small towns, we hold forums, and we educate. We blasted workforce housing last year, Alton. We did a great job with it. We're going to blast it again. And it happened on one-to-one. There is no overarch answer to this, folks. There's no one thing that's going to fix it. It's educating the populace, who is our government, and empowering them to get back into the fray so that we can start to have control again. And I think that cannot be underestimated. Hugely important here.
Could I just add one thing?
Let me just interject, because we've listened to you, and it was very good, by the way.
I just wanted to make one more comment.
All right, go ahead.
They held listening sessions. They call them listening sessions.
Yeah.
They went around from town to town to town.
Sure did.
Well, they have their final report out now. And the final report states that they had over 600 participants in 115 communities. Now think about, do the math. Do the math.
600 participants, that's 4 people per community.
Correct. Now, if you go to these listening sessions, as people in this room have, you'll know for a fact that a vast majority of those people were part of the people who are have interest directly in this planning process, and are directly being profited. And it's their thoughts that are going to be released in the public consensus. 600 people are going to be presented to the state as the public consensus. And the types of things that they're going to be pounding upon us is that everybody wants more workforce housing. Everybody wants high-density housing. We want mixed-use housing. We want housing above the buildings. Everybody's concerned about public transportation. If you go and you query your constituents, I'm sure it'll be the opposite of what they're saying that their public consensus stands for.
Jane, most people, other than new people, I tried to get workforce housing changed last term. One of the things that, Ken, you might want to know, in Britain versus Chester, the court order said that the planning boards had to look not only at the towns that they serve, but the surrounding towns.
Yes.
Well, one could actually take that one step further in defense of whether or not they have enough workforce housing by saying is, based on the order, we're allowed to look at the surrounding towns. If you combine town A, B, C, and D, we're well within parameters. But Jane, just on your point is, Representative Burt and I have been out on the stump, I guess you would want to call it, educating some of these towns. And when you bring up the strings that are attached with HUD, their jaws drop.
Absolutely.
And when they realize that every grant we get from the federal government has strings, they say, okay, but when you think about HUD, you don't realize that their numbers like there in Westchester, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to a small community, millions of dollars to a larger community. I mean, in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to a county. So when I got calls, John, I don't know if I told you this, but I got calls from the selectmen in the town that John and I spoke of, and that's what I said to him. I said, you know, if it's a DOT grant, yeah, you could pave another road, you know, put a sidewalk in, you could be in compliance. But with HUD, and granted, the sustainability thing I don't support at all, but with HUD, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to a small town to be in compliance with their sustainability charge. So that's what gets their attention at the local level. So
I just have one more comment though. The regions, now, a normal person would think, okay, there's gonna be regions in my state and it's gonna be adjacent towns. Well, those regions, according to HUD, they cross state boundaries. Lawrence is in the region for Windham and Atkinson and Salem. So their demographics and their economics and their salaries, average salaries, push down the salaries from those towns, and now it makes it even more difficult for the towns in New Hampshire to conform.
but that's not even in our statute.
But
In the federal
New
statute?
New Hampshire recognizes
The
the
federal-
HUD regions. I have the documentation.
I'm just saying though, the law, 674, 58 through 61, it doesn't tell you how much the dollar amount of the house is. It doesn't tell you how much the
It
income
has
level is.
percentages.
No, it says they use reasonable, or they
No,
say
it has
50%,
percentages.
50%
And
of the.
the definitions do have some numbers now where they put in proportions and
In statute.
percentages.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's under the
And those
definition.
statutes
And they go out of
differ.
state as well, like Ken said.
Well, that's not in the statute though.
One of the
That's
ways
a
that-
HUD thing.
One of the ways
Include
that
the large
that
I read
mass.
it in the
can be
RSA.
successful in thwarting an initiative, and I don't care what initiative it is to change the process of approval.
Correct.
For example, if a state law were passed in the interest of transparency, that required the selectmen to have a public hearing before they adopted any HUD or whatever it is,
Or any grant.
grant, and that as part of that process, they had to present information about the long-term consequences of the grant, including the dollar amount, you would see a very different kind of result. Or you might have a process that says, and I come from a town that still has town meetings, so that the voters, not the selectmen, have to approve HUD contracts. In other words, there are all sorts of things that can be done. And what I was hoping to hear from you was a plan that would make sense for towns, for counties, for the state. We've had a very difficult time. Jack is the exemplar of this. He's carried the sword and had it broken many times to try to change workforce housing, which was put in during a Democratic majority period. We haven't been successful yet. Jack will keep trying and failing, and eventually he'll succeed. But until that time, is there something we can do at the state level that isn't the confrontational battle that Jack is fighting, but effectively undermines the ground on which the HUD and the, what do you call it, the sustainable housing, whatever it is, or fair house, workforce housing, stands?
Yes, in fact, I have, over the past year and a half, I've been writing down my thoughts as to changes to legislation. And I probably have 15 to 20 different items.
Send them.
I don't, one of them is that the regional planning commissions should not be able to accept directly money from the federal government. There needs to be oversight. The oversight needs to come from you or our executive council. It needs to have elected representation, and maybe both bodies. Those are the types of things that we'll put together.
Let's start getting that, and then we can start initiating this as amendments to bills in the 2014 session.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Here's my information. Send it all. And I think most of the other folks in this room would like to hear it.
Very well, thank you.
John Michael from Goffstown. We just went through this in Goffstown with Bernardville, and a planned Bernardville initiative to do exactly what you're saying, same contracts, everything happened. It's been voted down in the planning board. John Burke was very instrumental in getting that word out and getting people to understand that this is happening. I had read the contract. I was on the ad hoc committee that was selected. Kind of, they asked us to be volunteers, but they were people from Southern New Hampshire Planning, from St. Anselm's, from all of the interest groups that had, they were all special interests.
Yep.
And matter of fact, there was a member on that board, on that ad hoc committee from Manchester, which had nothing to do with Goffstown, but she was sitting on that board. I think she was from the planning department as well in Manchester. So we've been doing that. We actually voted. We had the director of HUD come to our meetings and speak to us and promise us that everything that we're thinking is not going to happen. And everything,
I'll take that better. I'll take that one better. They did the same thing in Salem, because we gave a presentation in Salem. Salem had already signed on to this agreement. Their town planner and their town administrator did it without the knowledge of their planning board or their selectmen. We brought it to their attention. They were shocked. One of the Salem residents gave a presentation as to what this program is. The director of HUD for New Hampshire went in and gave a presentation. The selectmen specifically asked them, I think, 5 questions that they wanted asked of HUD. He assured them that HUD would give them an answer, that it wouldn't be a few days, that it usually takes about a month. More than 2 months later, they never got an answer. That's because they don't want to put it in writing.
right, they don't want to put it in writing.
It is in writing, and I showed you what was in writing.
Right, I would love to have, I wish I could have a copy of what you
But
I'll send you
there's
all.
some contradiction here between the Goffstown experience and what you're saying. Goffstown got the grant, they said, go to hell, we don't want it after the end, we don't want it. And they were assured by, I think it was Frost himself,
Yes, Rob.
that there were no consequences, you could say no and go on your merry way.
I don't think that's right.
But if that's the case, then playing the devil's advocate, what's there to worry about?
Well,
Because you have to
the-
look at the HUD grant. I'm not familiar with what grant money you signed with them in order to do.
Right. The opposition is, and we voted down, the planning board voted down. The problem is that we found that there was a split possibly in that contract where there was smart code, which is the zoning, and then there was this other plan. So voting down the plan doesn't vote down the smart code, and every time we try to bring it up at our planning board meetings, for instance, there's a reason that they don't want us to bring it up and vote on it. And I'm not sure, well, it's getting clearer why they are trying to push this off long enough to get past the January time so they can get it on our ballot. I'm not convinced that just voting for it by the planning board gets rid of it. And according to the letters that I've read and the contract, it doesn't get rid of it.
Well,
So
yeah, I'm Representative John Burke. In the contract that our selectmen signed for the $50,000, and we've spent almost $38,000 of it, and they refuse to return that money. So there is going to be a warrant article on the ballot for them to return it. In the grant, it says HUD has the final say. Regardless if New Hampshire Housing Finance does whatever they want, which they have, gave us a letter, Frost himself. And prior to that, it would take 2 to 3 weeks to get any letter. They had that signed letter from Frost within a couple hours. And now they refuse to release the smart code for the planning board to vote on it. And the reason for that is they want to keep it in the drawer. So the plan has been voted down.
But what did Mr. Frost give to you?
He gave us a letter saying the New Hampshire Housing Finance has no, we release you of all responsibility.
Yeah,
It was very vague.
of course, because it's HUD.
But they can't do that.
It's
You have
HUD
a
you gotta worry
contract.
about.
You are a sub-grantee of that grant. HUD will not recognize that.
That's what we're doing, but our selectmen, which will be voted out, our selectmen are saying, oh, no, you know, we got this letter from Frost and it's a done deal.
Yeah, what he's saying is New Hampshire Housing Finance isn't gonna come after you.
Yes, but HUD will.
HUD will.
Yes.
HUD will.
You know, but the problem that we're having now is that they won't release the smart code to the planning board. They're keeping it hidden in a drawer because they wanna bring that, and they have been quoted, our town employee has been quoted, people heard this, will just backdoor it next year.
The smart code thing is something that Alton saw for the first time last week as well. My planning board gave me some documents that had not shown up before at all in anything that I saw about smart codes, and that came out last week. There is something going on with that. I haven't been able to figure it out, but it does run parallel.
Yes.
But I'm not sure, you brought that up, and I'm glad you did, because I'm gonna go back and start dogging that one too, because that's the second part. They go in like, what are the word I want? First phase, right?
Right.
And when you went to their board meeting last year or last summer for the full committee board meeting, the next phase is the economic push. They're going to make everybody believe that all of the zoning and the smart growth and everything, the big PR push is going to be because it's economically, it's going to help you develop, in a positive way your district. So that's coming next. But that smart growth is something that we're seeing now, because they didn't talk about smart growth for quite a while. We didn't see those words. They came in 2000 with Gene Shaheen.
But smart growth is not something that is connected with these HUD grants.
It hasn't been.
Smart code. It's sustainability, it's another word for sustainability.
Right, but so far, at least in our town, the Regional Planning Commission has pushed this as something the town ought to do,
Right.
unconnected with any grants or any other opportunities. So at least for us, we have the chance to say thank you, but no thank you.
Exactly. No, as a former selectman, what happens is the planning boards buy into the smart growth. Okay, and then someone says, well, I like mixed use, and they want it to look like Pepperell, Massachusetts, or some, where you got the business on the bottom floor and the apartments, to make it look like some other community. But that's when they go to the New Hampshire Housing Finance to get the money to do their ordinance. But the amazing thing is on these ordinances, they've got your fee schedule, it's $10,000 to this person to write the ordinance. How many times do you need to write the same ordinance to keep making $10,000? I mean, it's not like rocket science. I mean, what works probably in one small town will work in another small town. So someone's making a lot of money, and that's why these other people are getting involved in, what were they called, non-participant partners, or they were
Pay to
Pay to
play.
play.
paying to play. Yeah, because they want part of that money
And
coming.
they're getting a lot of it.
We just signed up for that.
You did?
Goffstown. Just signed up for play, whatever it's called, pay to play. No, what's the new one that's just coming out?
Oh, yeah, work with play, that one?
Yeah, Goffstown just signed up for it.
Isn't the lesson from today's presentation, never sign anything that has HUD involved with it?
Yeah,
That's a
that's
good
the
thing, right?
lesson.
Yeah.
Not with our select.
But the planning, I can tell you, they don't tell the select boards or the planning boards that that's in there.
But
They sign on to them without knowing.
I was told by the director of HUD, and I'll only use the title of the position because that person can change. We had an extra $5 million hanging around, we thought we'd give it out to the communities to enhance their zoning.
How about returning it to my federal tax pocket?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or reduce the deficit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm
ready, set, go.
I've gone through it.
I
I've
just
seen
signed
it.
up for that.
Ready, set, go, that's it. Yeah, we've seen it firsthand.
Ready, set, go.
I don't understand why anybody would think that that's a beneficial program.
Because our town selectmen are,
They just
Free
they're
money.
state employees,
They think it's
town
free money.
employees.
They
money.
Somebody wants to give them a grant, yeah, sure, do it.
That's right.
And they do it every
That's
time.
right.
All of them.
Thank you, Jane.
That's just one of
Thank
them.
you. I'd like to thank governmentoversight.com for coming out today too, and
Yeah.
getting this video.
Take thumbs up.
Nice.
Well, thanks for coming. If you have questions,
Thanks, Jane, for listening to us.
Well, no, either way. But I get some more
do you have any
also.
Remember a lot about you, first time I've seen you.
Dick, we'll see you
Oh,
right
yeah.
Priorities.
That's right.
Email me any information.
Good.
I'm trying to kill it in my town.
That's what people say.
You just get by that way, huh? Well, that's a good thing to
Take it back to
I posted on YouTube.
do you?
My name,
We're trying to get that
John Ruffenberg.
They don't like to hear it.
Well, they've usurped us, they've usurped the Constitution, they don't recognize anything, they are the ultimate power, they can give it. And we don't know how to get it back, so, you know, we do have recourse, but we can't get to understand that.
No, I am clear because people try to paint that.
You get one redress petition.
I got probably 100 plus films in this last year.
Because I've seen you around.
I don't like them anymore. I don't like them.